The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Grosvenor House ballroom, each droplet catching the golden light from the crystal chandeliers above. Marcus Blackwood adjusted his platinum cufflinks and surveyed the crowd of London's elite with the calculating gaze that had earned him his reputation as the city's most ruthless CEO. At 32, he commanded Blackwood Industries with an iron fist, turning his inherited shipping company into a global empire worth billions. Tonight's charity auction was different from the usual stuffy affairs he attended out of obligation. The Whitmore Foundation's annual event had a darker edge. Wealthy patrons could bid on anonymous companions for upcoming social events. It was all perfectly legal, marketed as hiring sophisticated escorts for business functions, but Marcus knew the real game being played. "Lot number 7, announced the auctioneer, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Omega 7, available for a 3-month exclusive arrangement. A woman stepped onto the small stage, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, an unfamiliar tightness he couldn't name. She wore a simple black evening gown that hugged her slender frame, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. But it was the silver mask covering the upper half of her face that held his attention. Unlike the other women who had paraded across the stage with practiced smiles and calculated poses, this one stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, chin raised with quiet dignity. "She doesn't speak," the auctioneer continued, "but comes with the highest recommendations for discretion and grace, perfect for the gentleman who values mystery and sophistication." Marcus watched as other men in the room leaned forward, their interest clearly piqued. Lord Pemberton, known for his wandering hands and cruel streak, raised his paddle first. 50,000. The bidding escalated quickly. Marcus remained motionless, studying the woman on stage. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that spoke of breeding and education. This wasn't some desperate girl driven to this life by circumstances, at least not entirely. 150,000, called out Viktor Petrov, the Russian oil magnate whose third wife had recently filed for divorce. Marcus finally raised his paddle. 200,000. A hush fell over the room. It was more than double what any previous lot had commanded. The woman on stage turned slightly, and even through the mask he felt her gaze find his across the crowded ballroom. For a moment, the rest of the world faded away. 250,000, Petrov countered, his voice tight with irritation. Marcus didn't hesitate. 500,000. Gasps echoed through the room. Even the auctioneer paused, his gavel frozen mid-air. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the masked woman, who remained perfectly still except for the slight rise and fall of her chest. 500,000 going once, twice. The auctioneer's voice carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Sold to Mr. Blackwood." As applause filled the room, Marcus watched the woman, his woman now at least for the next 3 months, descend from the stage with fluid grace. She moved like royalty, he realized, each step deliberate and measured. When she reached his table, she extended her hand in a gesture that was more queen receiving a subject than purchased companion greeting her buyer. Marcus took her gloved hand and felt a jolt of electricity pass between them. Up close he could see her eyes through the mask's openings, deep blue, intelligent, and holding secrets that made his pulse quicken. "I'm Marcus," he said quietly, his usual commanding tone replaced by something softer. She nodded once, acknowledging him, but remained silent as promised. Instead, she gestured toward the exit with elegant efficiency, making it clear she expected him to follow. As they walked through the ballroom together, Marcus was acutely aware of the stares and whispered conversations following in their wake. He'd just spent £500,000 on a woman whose name he didn't even know, whose voice he'd never heard. It was reckless, impulsive, everything he'd trained himself not to be. But as they stepped into his waiting Bentley, the mysterious Omega 7 settling into the leather seat beside him with practiced grace, Marcus Blackwood realized he'd never wanted anything more in his life. Marcus's penthouse overlooked the Thames, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of London's glittering skyline. He'd brought Omega 7 here directly from the auction, unsure of protocol for a situation he'd never found himself in before. She stood in his living room now, still wearing that silver mask, her hands folded as she took in her surroundings with the same quiet dignity she'd displayed on stage. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft patter of rain against glass. Marcus poured himself a whiskey, his usual method of processing complicated business deals, But this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked, turning to face her. She shook her head once, then moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. Marcus studied her profile, noting the aristocratic line of her nose, the fullness of her lips, the only features visible beneath the mask. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Background check complete, sending file now." Marcus pulled up the encrypted document, expecting to find the usual information: previous clients, real name, perhaps a sob story about university debt or family obligations. Instead, he found almost nothing. Omega-7 had appeared in the companion circuit just 6 months ago. No criminal record, no financial difficulties, no digital footprint before this year. It was as if she'd materialized from thin air. "You're a mystery," he said aloud, more to himself than to her. She turned from the window, and even through the mask he could see something flicker in her eyes. Fear? Recognition? Before he could analyze it further, she moved toward the guest bedroom he'd indicated earlier, clearly intending to retire for the evening. "Wait," Marcus called out, causing her to pause at the doorway. "I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I want you to know you're safe here. I'm not interested in—" He struggled to find the right words. "I didn't buy you for what you might think." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those enigmatic blue eyes. Then, to his surprise, she approached his desk and picked up a pen. On a notepad, she wrote in elegant script, "Then what did you buy me for?" Her handwriting was refined, educated, definitely not what he'd expected from someone in her profession. Marcus read the note twice before answering. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "Something about you in that ballroom." "I couldn't let one of those other men have you," she wrote again. "Possessive. Protective," he corrected, then frowned at his own response. He wasn't typically given to such impulses, especially not for strangers. This time, her written response made him pause. "You don't even know my name." Marcus met her gaze. "What is your name?" For the first time since he'd met her, she hesitated. Her pen hovered over the paper for long moments before she finally wrote, "Does it matter?" "Everything matters," Marcus replied. "Especially names. They have power." Something shifted in her posture at those words. She set the pen down carefully and backed toward the guest room again, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hands. "You're afraid of something," he observed. "Or someone." She froze, her back still turned to him. "Whatever it is, whoever it is, they can't reach you here. This building has security that rivals government facilities. My staff are completely loyal and discreet." Marcus moved closer, careful not to crowd her. "You can trust me." She turned then, and even through the mask, he could see the conflict playing across her features. Slowly, she returned to the desk and wrote, "Trust isn't given, it's earned." "Then let me earn it," Marcus said simply. She stared at him for a long moment, then wrote one final note before disappearing into the guest room. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." Alone in his living room, Marcus read her elegant handwriting over and over. There was something familiar about the way she formed her letters, the particular slant of her script. He'd seen handwriting like this before, in board meetings and signed contracts, among the elite families who'd built London's financial district. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "James, I need you to run a deeper background check. Focus on missing persons reports from the past 3 years. Upper class, educated, between 22 and 28 years old. Any particular reason for the search parameters, sir?" Marcus glanced toward the closed guest room door, behind which his mysterious companion was presumably preparing for bed, that silver mask finally removed in privacy. "I have a feeling our Omega-7 is hiding in plain sight," he murmured, "and tomorrow I'm going to find out exactly who she really is." Marcus woke to the sound of piano music drifting through his penthouse. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with the kind of technical precision that spoke of years of classical training. He checked his watch, 6:30 a.m. Following the sound, he found Omega-7 seated at his rarely used Steinway grand piano, her fingers moving across the keys with practiced elegance. She'd changed from the evening gown into simple jeans and a white silk blouse, clothes that his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, must have procured for her during the night, but she still wore the silver mask, even in the privacy of his home. Marcus stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she looked even more ethereal, more mysterious. When the piece ended, she sat with her hands resting on the keys, as if gathering herself. "That was beautiful," Marcus said softly. She turned, startled, then quickly stood from the piano bench. Her posture became guarded again, the same careful composure she'd maintained the night before. "You play like you've had professional training," he continued, moving into the room. "Conservatory level." She watched him warily but didn't respond. Marcus noticed a cup of tea cooling on the side table. Earl Grey, from the smell of it. Even her choice of beverage spoke of refined tastes. His phone buzzed. A message from James. "Found something. 3 missing persons reports match your parameters. Sending files now." Marcus glanced at his companion, who had returned to her position by the window, gazing out at the Thames. "I have some business calls to make," he told her. "Please make yourself comfortable. Mrs. Chen will prepare whatever you'd like for breakfast." In his study, Marcus opened the encrypted files James had sent. The first 2 were quickly dismissed: a university student who'd disappeared after a mental breakdown, and a young woman fleeing an abusive relationship. Neither matched the elegance and breeding he'd observed in Omega-7, but the third file made his breath catch. Isabella Rose Whitmore, age 24, disappeared March 15, 2021. Last seen leaving family estate in Hampshire following the Whitmore banking scandal. No trace since. The photograph showed a stunning young woman with dark hair and intelligent blue eyes he'd stared into just hours ago. But it was the accompanying information that truly shocked him. Isabella Whitmore was the youngest daughter of Lord Richard Whitmore, former chairman of Whitmore Private Bank. The family had been royalty in London's financial district for over a century, until 3 years ago, when everything fell apart. Marcus read through the scandal details with growing understanding. Lord Whitmore had been accused of embezzling client funds to cover massive gambling debts. The investigation had revealed years of financial misconduct, resulting in the bank's collapse and the family's disgrace. Richard Whitmore had died of a heart attack just days before his trial was set to begin. Isabella had been named as a potential co-conspirator by the prosecution, though charges were never filed due to lack of evidence. She'd disappeared the same night her father died, leaving behind a family fortune in ruins and a reputation destroyed by association. Marcus stared at the photograph, comparing it to his memories of the woman in his living room. Same bone structure, same elegant posture, same aristocratic bearing. But the Isabella in this photo was bright-eyed and confident, wearing a designer gown at some charity gala. The woman he'd bought last night carried herself like someone who'd learned to hide, to survive. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood. The young lady asked me to give you this." She handed him a folded piece of paper, then retreated with her usual discretion. Marcus unfolded the note, recognizing the elegant handwriting from the night before. "I'll be ready whenever you need me for your first event. Thank you for your hospitality." The formality of it stung. After learning who she really was, Lady Isabella Whitmore, daughter of one of England's most prominent families, her determination to maintain this facade felt almost tragic. He found her in the guest room, packing the few items Mrs. Chen had provided into a small bag. She looked up when he entered, and he could see the walls she'd rebuilt around herself overnight. "Going somewhere?" he asked. She picked up the notepad from the nightstand and wrote, "You said 3 months. I assume you have events that require an escort. I should return to my agency to await instructions. What if I don't want you to go back?" Her pen paused over the paper. When she finally wrote her response, her handwriting was less steady. "That wasn't our arrangement." Marcus closed the door behind him and leaned against it. "Our arrangement was based on a lie, wasn't it, Isabella?" The effect was immediate and devastating. She dropped the pen as if it had burned her, backing away from him until she hit the wall. Her breathing became shallow, rapid, and for a moment he thought she might collapse. "It's all right," Marcus said quickly, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to turn you in or expose you." She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. The careful composure she'd maintained for so long finally cracked, and Marcus could see the frightened young woman beneath the mysterious facade. He moved slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, and sat on the floor across from her. "Lady Isabella Rose Whitmore," he said gently, "daughter of Lord Richard Whitmore, graduate of Oxford with honours in modern history, accomplished pianist, fluent in 4 languages and, according to your society page mentions, an advocate for children's literacy programs. She looked up at him through the mask, tears visible in her blue eyes. You've been hiding for 3 years, Marcus continued, running from a scandal that wasn't even your fault, living as someone else, surviving however you could. Very slowly, with trembling hands, Isabella reached up and removed her silver mask. Without the mask, Isabella Whitmore was breathtaking. But it wasn't her beauty that struck Marcus most. It was the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the weight of 3 years spent looking over her shoulder, never truly safe. "You know who I am," she said, and her voice was exactly what he'd expected. Cultured, refined, with just a hint of the vulnerability she'd been hiding. "So you know why I can't, why this arrangement won't work." It was the first time he'd heard her speak, and the sound sent something warm spreading through his chest. Her accent was pure upper-class English, the kind that came from generations of breeding and the finest education money could buy. "Actually, I think it's perfect," Marcus replied, earning a confused look from her. "You need protection and anonymity. I need a companion who can navigate high society without embarrassing me. You were born for that world, Isabella. You know it better than anyone." She shook her head, dark hair falling around her shoulders now that it was free from the chignon. "That world destroyed my family. They'll crucify you if they discover who I am. Your reputation, your business. Let me worry about my reputation." Marcus moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. "Tell me what really happened. Not the version the newspapers printed, but the truth." Isabella was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I found the discrepancies in the accounts 6 months before the scandal broke. Millions missing, transactions that didn't make sense. I went to my father immediately." Her hands clenched in her lap. "He told me he was handling it, that it was just a bookkeeping error. I believed him because he was my father, and Lord Whitmore had never lied to me before. But he had been stealing. Not stealing, borrowing. The distinction seemed important to her. He'd been using client funds to cover his gambling debts for years, always intending to pay it back. When the markets crashed and the bank lost several major investments, there wasn't enough liquid capital to cover both the losses and replace what he'd taken." Marcus felt a familiar anger building, not at Isabella, but at the man who'd put his daughter in this impossible position. "You tried to help him fix it. I liquidated my trust fund, sold everything I owned. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough." Her voice broke slightly. "The night before his trial, Father called me into his study. He told me he'd named me as a co-conspirator in his confession to the prosecutors, said if he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone." Jesus Christ! The words escaped before Marcus could stop them. What kind of man threw his own daughter to the wolves to save himself? He had a heart attack an hour later. The stress, the guilt, his body just gave up. Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I found his confession on his desk the next morning. My name was all over it, painting me as the mastermind behind the whole scheme. The prosecutors would have had to charge me." "So you ran." "I ran," she confirmed. "I've been Isabella Whitmore for 24 years, and then suddenly I wasn't anymore. I became Omega-7 6 months ago when my savings ran out and I got desperate. The agency promised anonymity, wealthy clients who valued discretion. You never thought someone would pay £500,000 for you." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "The irony isn't lost on me. 3 years ago, £500,000 was what I spent on charity galas in a single season." Marcus studied her face, noting the way she held herself even in vulnerability. Straight spine, chin up, shoulders back. Even broken, Isabella Whitmore carried herself like royalty. "I want to make you a different offer," he said finally. She looked up at him, wariness creeping back into her expression. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Isabella's eyes went wide, and for a moment Marcus thought she might bolt from the room. "That's insane," she breathed. "Is it? Think about it practically. As my wife, you'd have legal protection, a new identity, access to resources that could help clear your name, and I'd have what I've always needed, a partner who understands the world I operate in. You don't love me. You don't even know me." Marcus moved closer, close enough that he could see her pulse fluttering at her throat. "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to sacrifice everything for your family, even when they don't deserve it." I know you're smart enough to survive 3 years on your own with half the world looking for you, and I know that when you played piano this morning, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Isabella stared at him, searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or signs of deception. "This is crazy," she whispered. "The best business decisions usually are." Marcus reached out and took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit in his. "What do you say, Lady Isabella? Will you let me help you reclaim your life?" For the first time since he'd learned her real name, Isabella smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I say yes, Mr. Blackwood, but on one condition." "Name it." "You call me Bella. Only my father called me Isabella, and I'm done being that frightened girl he left behind." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Bella it is, and you can call me Marcus. After all, we're going to be married." 2 weeks after Marcus's proposal, Bella stood in the bridal suite of London's most exclusive registry office, staring at her reflection in an antique mirror. The simple, cream-colored dress she wore was elegant but understated. Nothing like the elaborate gown she'd once imagined for her wedding day. But then again, nothing about her life had gone according to plan. "You look beautiful," said Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, and the closest thing Bella had to a friend in her new life. Sarah had served as witness and unofficial wedding planner, handling the details with the same discretion her mother brought to managing Marcus's household. "I look terrified," Bella corrected, smoothing down the silk fabric with trembling hands. "That too," Sarah smiled kindly. "But Marcus looks just as nervous, if that makes you feel better. I've never seen him pace before today." Through the window, Bella could see the Thames flowing past, the same view she'd grown accustomed to from Marcus's penthouse. In the 2 weeks since accepting his proposal, they'd fallen into an oddly comfortable routine. He left for work early each morning, returning to find her reading in his library or playing piano. They shared dinners and careful conversations, dancing around the growing attraction between them, while maintaining the pretense that this was purely a business arrangement. But Bella had caught him watching her sometimes, when she laughed at something he said or when she absent-mindedly hummed while reading. And she'd found herself doing the same, stealing glances at his hands when he worked at his computer, or the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit. But it was the expression on his face that made her breath catch, tender, almost reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony," Bella said, attempting lightness despite her racing heart. "Since when do we follow tradition?" Marcus stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving her face. "Besides, I wanted to give you something." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Bella's stomach fluttered. They'd handled all the practical aspects of their arrangement, the prenuptial agreement that protected both their interests, the legal documents that would give her a new identity, the financial arrangements that would allow her to start fresh. But this felt different, personal. "It's not an engagement ring," Marcus said quickly, noting her expression. I thought you might want something that belonged to you, not to this arrangement we've made." He opened the box to reveal a delicate pendant, a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, hanging from a platinum chain. It was beautiful, but more importantly, it was modest enough that she could wear it anywhere without drawing attention. "Marcus, I can't—" "It matches your eyes," he said simply, taking the necklace from the box. "May I?" Bella turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the clasp. His fingers were gentle against her neck, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool air. "There's something else," Marcus said when she turned back around. "My investigators finished their work on your father's case." Bella went still. They'd agreed that clearing her name was a long-term goal, something to work toward once she was safely established in her new identity. She hadn't expected results so quickly. "What did they find?" Marcus pulled out a manila folder, his expression serious. "Your father wasn't the mastermind, Bella. He was being blackmailed." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "Lord Pemberton, you remember him from the auction? Had evidence of your father's gambling debts. He threatened to expose them unless your father allowed him to use the bank for money laundering operations. The missing funds weren't just covering debts. They were being used to clean money for Pemberton's criminal associates." Bella sank into a nearby chair, the information overwhelming. "Father never said—he let me believe he was just weak. just addicted to gambling. He was protecting you. If Pemberton had known you were investigating the discrepancies, you would have become a target too. Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Your father may have made mistakes, but the confession naming you as a co-conspirator, that was Pemberton's insurance policy, written under duress. Tears spilled down Bella's cheeks, not just for her father, but for the 3 years she'd spent believing he'd betrayed her. Can we prove it? We can. Pemberton kept records, insurance of his own in case his partners turned on him. My investigators found them. Marcus squeezed her hands. You can have your life back, Bella. Your real life, your real name, you don't have to hide anymore. The weight of his words settled over her. Freedom, vindication, the ability to walk through London without fear, to reclaim the Whitmore name, to honor her father's memory properly. But as she looked at Marcus, this man who'd paid £500,000 for her companionship and then offered her marriage as salvation, she realized something had changed. The thought of returning to her old life, of no longer needing his protection, didn't bring the relief she'd expected. Instead, it terrified her. What happens to us? She asked quietly. If I don't need this arrangement anymore? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. I suppose that depends on what you want. I want... Bella took a shaky breath. I want to marry you, Marcus. Not because I need protection or a new identity, but because somehow in the past 2 weeks, you've become the most important person in my world. The smile that spread across Marcus's face was brilliant, transforming his usually serious expression into something boyish and hopeful. Are you sure? Because I have to tell you, Bella, I'm not an easy man to love. I'm demanding, possessive, and I work too much. And I'm legally dead with a criminal past and trust issues, Bella replied, laughing despite her tears. I think we're perfect for each other. Marcus stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face. Then let's go get married, Lady Bella Blackwood, and afterward we'll figure out how to be happy. As he kissed her, their first real kiss, soft and full of promise, Bella realized that sometimes the best fairy tales were the ones that started with the worst circumstances. She'd lost everything 3 years ago, but standing here in Marcus's arms, she finally understood what she'd gained. She'd found her king, and more importantly, she'd found herself. An hour later, as they walked out of the registry office as husband and wife, photographers from various tabloids snapped pictures of London's most eligible bachelor and his mysterious bride. By evening, the headlines would read, Blackwood Industries, CEO marries unknown, beauty in secret ceremony. But Bella no longer feared the headlines. Let them speculate, let them investigate. She had Marcus's ring on her finger, his name as her shield, and for the first time in 3 years, she had hope for the future. The lost heiress had finally come home.